Hey everyone, this is sort of a kind of introduction to what's happening this week and also kind of a comment or general comment on the forum discussions for last week. Last week in the forums, you were asked to decide whether or not liminality could be considered a an aspect or attribute of God's divine nature. And this is problematic or exciting or both, depending on where you come from in questions of Trinitarianism. And and that's because Lee's concept of liminality is kind of being not at home in between spaces, right? So Lee kind of looks at Korean culture and American culture and doesn't quite fit in either one, and Lee's experience is that of kind of venturing out, from one to the other, and never quite arriving at a destination, and always sort of being in between, never quite fully one thing or the other. And then Lee goes on to express some theological implications for this, namely the idea that that possibility or openness, vulnerability, that these are distinctively Christian things. That the experience of liminality, where you truly are vulnerable, truly are in the realm of the possible and not truly home, that there's something distinctively Christian about that, and therefore that it must be speaking to something in the divine nature. And of course, as we've seen, that's really problematic with classical theism, because classical theism, and really any kind of Latin Christianity that focuses on God's oneness, would have a very, very difficult time thinking of God as ever dislocated, right? As between anything. God is fully in all in God's self, right? And the notion that the Godhead could have any experience or admit of any attribute or any aspect that is somehow vulnerable, that's somehow open to possibility, that just seems really, really weird. And so and there's two ways of going about it. The kind of classical way is to say, wait a minute, there's some problems here. Like, you can say what you want about Jesus' life being itinerant, being living sort of a liminal ministry, right? You can say that, yeah, Jesus is always between sort of his home in heaven and the experience of being dislocated on earth, but surely that has very little to do with the way God exists eternally in God's triunity. And Lee wants to say, and I think that constructive contemporary Trinitarianism wants to say, well, maybe there's a possibility here. Maybe there's a way to mediate these things. And the key then is to develop what I'd like to call a Trinitarian analysis, right, of the roles of the Godhead in their economic functions. And in the next lecture, we'll talk a little bit more about economic versus immanent and the relations holding between the two. But for now, suffice it to say that what Lee proposes, right, is the incarnation is a moment of liminality, right? So the Father sends the Son to take on human flesh, to assume human nature, which we'll talk about more as the course goes on, and yet does so with in the unity and power of the Spirit, right? So what Lee proposes is that, and we might be adding a little to what Lee says here, but what's going on is there is a genuine notion of sending. Like, there is a notion of the second person's being sent from the Father, being dislocated from the Father, and yet there's always the eternal unification of Father and Son in the Spirit, right? And so what Lee wants to create is like a space for some kind of real sending, liminality, vulnerability. And of course, vulnerability reaches its climax in the cross, right? And the cry of abandonment, why have you forsaken me? And so we have in the example of the economy of God, these real things, but they're never, they are eternally countered, or they're eternally balanced, or they're eternally intertwined with the unification, the glorification of the Son by the Father and the Spirit, right? And so, just as we see economically the resurrection and ascension, right, the sending, liminality, and vulnerability of the Godhead is eternally, you want to say intention? No, is eternally balanced, or eternally subsumed by, perhaps, the unification or glorification of the Son by the Father and the Spirit. By holding these three persons of the one God in tension, Lee wants to carve out a space where this is real, and that God's eternal being knows this. And so the economy where the Son comes and is crucified and then raised and ascending, it's not like that's new for the Godhead, right? It's not as though the Godhead's like, wow, I've never experienced anything like vulnerability or liminality before. Instead, this is somehow, it's endemic to what we called the Trinitarian dance, right? Where the Father is always sending the Son, who's always being reunited in the Spirit. And it's interpenetrated, it's perichoretic. And so even though that we can make distinctions here between these different acts of the Godhead eternally, in actual practice in eternity, they're all one and the same. The bottom line is, I think that if we hold on to Trinitarian theology and we're careful about the way that we think through the economic roles of the persons of the Trinity in history, in the life of Jesus, the life of Israel, then I think we can see more about what's going on in the Godhead than maybe classical theism would have allowed or admitted. And so that's one possible way, and some of you came up with something similar to this in the forums, but this is one way to do an economic analysis. That is an analysis of the actions of the history of God with the world, that lead to or show us some potential immanent, that is within God's own being, aspects or natures or attributes of the nature of God. And in this case, I think we can make a pretty decent case that Lee's right, and that there is a sense in which there is genuine liminality within God. And if you disagree, that's okay too. The question you have to answer is, how is it that Jesus can be the full manifestation of the divine nature and go through what Jesus went through? What do you make of the incarnation? Because it seems like it'd be very odd if God doesn't expose God's self to the vagaries of human life.